know about you, but there's not much sexier than that worm right there. Yep. Hey guys, Tyler Berger with BassFishingHQ. Today we're going to talk about the big worm. So the big worm for me is literally probably one of my favorite techniques that there is to catch a bass. I love this thing. I love it a lot. And I tend to be a little bit more of a fast-paced fisherman. I love to go out there and cast your chatterbaits, your crankbaits, your top waters, things that are faster paced. But man, I just don't know if there's a more fun way to catch a bass than with this big worm. And something that I really love about it too is that obviously you're using one single big hook. And so a lot of times a lot of times you hook the fish that bite this, and a lot of times you're putting them in the boat, which is different in comparison to some baits like a crankbait or a top water, where sometimes your landing percentage, because you're using treble hooks, is going to go down. So that's one of the reasons why I love the big worm. And before we get started talking about the when, the where, the why, the how, I want to tell you a little story about this lure right here. And this is when I really fell in love with this. I'm from Ohio, right? So basically most of the time I'm fishing for bass that are like smaller than this worm, right? So I didn't throw this a whole lot growing up. And when I say growing up, I mean when I'm like 13, 14, 15 years old. But when I started fishing tournaments, I obviously started experimenting more and more with baits, even baits that are bigger than most of the bass like we have here in Ohio. And I remember fishing this tournament on a local reservoir, and I was fishing some kind of the off the bank, offshore type stuff, and it was a really tough tournament, right? It was like in that end of July, August period, and the bite was tough, and a lot of guys weren't weighing in limits, and I had thrown everything earlier that day, didn't have a single fish. And I want to say that, this was when I was younger, so I want to say when I 1 o'clock, I put this bait on, and in the last hour and a half, I caught a limit, which was a big deal in that tournament, right? I put together a limit fishing this exact worm right here, a 3/8 ounce weight, a big hook, a zoom mode monster, and plum. And that's when I really fell in love with it, because not only was I getting bites, but I talked to a couple of my buddies that day, and one of my other buddies had thrown a shaky head the entire day, right? He had thrown the bait that's supposed to get you bites all day long. He caught one fish. And so it just made me see that, you know what, this worm gets bites, right? And sometimes I think it's better to almost upsize when you're trying to get bites. I feel like it's better to upsize a worm than go with a small shaky head. And that's just my personal opinion, but I think it holds true. And that's why I really fell in love with the big worm. So let's first talk about when to throw this, right? So when to throw this is anytime, anywhere, any place, right? There's two different big worms that I like. Okay, there's two different big worms that I like, and these are both Zoom products. I'm not sponsored by Zoom, but I fished a lot of big worms, and these are simply the best, right? So you got the Zoom Old Monster worm. This is a 10.5-inch worm, fantastic. And then you got the Zoom Magnum trick worm. So this is I believe a 7-inch worm, but it's just a thicker profile worm than their original trick worm, which this is a spin-off of. So these are the two worms that I like to fish, right? So when do I like to fish these? I like to fish this during 2 times of the year, and that's pre-spawn fishing. When that water's a little bit colder, you might want some water displacement, but you don't want a ton of action, and this worm works really good in the pre-spawn. It also works really good in the late summer to fall transition time. You know, when the fishing gets really tough and you don't want a bait again that has a lot of action, I like to put this worm on. And sometimes you can put it on like a stand-up shaky head, but you can fish it on bait cast tackle, and that's a phenomenal way, and that's what I really like. That's when I really like to throw this Magnum trick worm, right? As far as the Zumo monster, again, I love to fish this almost any time, but this is probably my number one bait for just summertime fishing, right? When those fish start to get offshore and they're on rocky points or they're in brush piles, I love this worm, right? You might be able to locate bass with a crankbait or something a little bit quicker, but to slow down, to drag this worm off of a ledge, to drag it off some grass, to drag it in a brush pile, this is gonna get not only a lot of bites, but it's gonna get a big bite, and that's why we like to throw it. So as far as colors go, I really only have 4 colors that I fish in both of these worms, right? One is a watermelon, one is green pumpkin, one is plum, and one is June bug, right? So you kind of have a scale from going from like a lighter colored bait to a dark bait. And I really only, the biggest difference in when I use one color versus another is basically depending on the water color that I'm fishing, right? So like in really clean, clear water, I like the green pumpkins, I like the watermelons. In a little bit off color water, I like the plum. And then in dark water, whether that's, you know, not necessarily muddy water, but just darker stained water, I like the June bug. And then in Florida, you can't hardly beat June bug. Another time I throw June bug a lot is simply just in the mornings, right? Because June bug's a darker color, and so it silhouettes better in dark water. So a lot of times in the morning when the sun is rising, I like to throw that June bug, and then I switch over to like a green pumpkin, a plum, or watermelon. So talking about where I like to throw these baits, it's pretty simple to me. I typically am fishing these baits offshore for the most part. I do like to flip the old monster worm in the summer. That is a great way to catch fish. It shows them something that they haven't seen. But for the most part, I'm fishing offshore. So where I like to throw this is generally on ledges, on points, in brush piles, or around some sort of submergent grass like hydrilla or milfoil that's maybe off the bank, right? I use these worms a lot in the summer, and typically in the summer I'm fishing off the bank, and that's when I like to throw them, where I like to throw them. So again, talking about the why and why these baits, why you need to throw these baits more often is, again, they just get bites, right? Like you can go out and feel confident that you're gonna catch almost any bass that sees this bait between 12 inches and 10 pounds. They're gonna bite this bait. And again, big fish bite these baits. So let's talk about how. To me, big worm fishing, you can't overcomplicate it, right? It's literally just a big worm. Most of the time, I'm casting this bait and just dragging it on the bottom, or I'm hopping it. That's one or the other. That's most of the time what I'm doing. I'm inching it across the bottom, or I'm lifting it up, hopping over the bottom, right? So if I, you know, a lot of times when I'm fishing this on like offshore ledges or points or humps and stuff like that, I just simply like to drag it kind of at a fast pace. I'm usually using a 3/8 to a 1/2 ounce weight, dragging it. And then if I find an area where those fish are, I like to slow it down in those areas and help those fish just pick off that bait. Now, I also like to throw this a lot just in brush piles. So you locate that brush pile, you cast it past the brush pile, and you just work it through. Again, this is super weedless. It comes through anything. Just ask Clint Davis. He'll tell you all about $300,000 he won on this bait. So another place that I love throwing this is in hydrilla or milfoil grass, right? I love finding edges or isolated like clumps of milfoil or hydrilla and just dragging this worm through it. A lot of guys in those situations are throwing your rattle traps and your chatterbaits, which they're great baits to fish in those areas. But sometimes slowing down and showing those bass something different is the key to getting a little bit bigger bites. And that's what I love doing. So that's kind of the when, where, why, and how to fish the big worm. So when it comes to tackle, let's talk about it, right? I keep it pretty simple. Like all the fishing that I try to do, I try to keep it simple. I like a 7-foot 3-inch rod, a medium heavy to heavy action. This is actually, this is my favorite rod of all time in the history of rods, I think. This is a 7-foot 3-inch Tatula Elite Series. It's actually Takahiro Mori's pitching rod, right? It's a heavy action rod, but it has a little bit of more of a medium heavy action to it. This rod is just phenomenal though. I use it for a lot of different applications, but it's perfect for the big worm, right? It's got a stiff backbone, but a softer tip, so I can really lob a worm out there, but I can get that hook set on a big fish when I need to at a long distance. When it comes to line, I'm typically using 15 to 20 pound line. I like 15 a lot. It's just a smaller diameter line. You can kind of feel everything a little bit better. 15, 17, 20, depending on what the conditions you're fishing, right? Like I use 15 a lot. I mean, I fish in brush piles. Now, if I was on Lake Sam Rayburn and I'm fishing brush piles offshore, I might step it up to like a 17 or a 20. A lot of times I'm using 15 pound line, right? So 15 pound line, 7-foot 3-inch rod. As far as your reel goes, you're gonna want a faster gear ratio reel. So anything over 7.3 is gonna work just fine, right? So your 7.3s, 8.3s are fantastic, even higher if you want, right? Because you're not working, most of the time, you're not working the bait with the reel, right? You're using the rod to move the bait across the bottom and you're just catching up on your slack with the reel. So I like a high-speed reel. This is a 7.3. Like I said though, 7.3s, 8.3s, 9.3s, 10.3s, whatever you want to use, as long as it's a faster reel, is gonna work great. So guys, use those tips and catch you some big bass on a big worm this year. I'm telling you what, you just gotta pick it up. Oh, don't let me, I can't forgot to tell you this. Real important, your hook, right? I'm not gonna say don't use this because I know a lot of guys use this style hook, which is an EWG hook, and they get away with it. I wouldn't use it though, right? An EWG hook where the line kind of comes where it's parallel. Shut up, mother. All right, well, let's reverse. All right, guys, so when it comes to the hook that you want to use on a big worm, I do not suggest using the EWG hook, right? This is an EWG, stands for extra wide gap. This is a hook a lot of guys do use with this style of worm. I don't recommend it, right? If you look at that hook, which is the same with most EWGs, that hook point is usually about parallel, about even with the shank right there. I don't really like that because I feel like I actually miss quite a few fish when I use this style hook, and I've used a lot of different hooks, and this hook does have some decent applications, but I'm starting to just not use an EWG more and more because I just feel like I miss fish. Like the bait will come through the fish's mouth and I'll miss that fish when they have it in their mouth. I get it back and nothing's changed with my worm. It's the exact same, it's still exposed and everything. And so I've kind of learned that I don't like that style of worm. Now what I do like is just your standard offset worm hook or a straight shank, right? So here's your standard offset worm hook. I like to rig it still kind of exposed. I will leave the hook inside the worm, but usually what I do, usually what I do is I put the hook all the way through the worm, like all the way, and then I kind of like, I put it all the way through just to kind of give that hook a path, and then I put it back inside the worm, make sure that it is nice and straight, and there you go. It's a little crooked, but you get the point, right? That hook hooks a lot of fish. This is an owner offset worm hook. This is actually a 4/0. I prefer the 5/0. I just don't have any on me right now. I just used them all up the last tournament I was in. But a 5/0 EWG owner hook works. That style hook, that offset worm hook, is gonna be your best bet. If you don't have that, a straight shank hook works great. You're gonna want one that has a keeper on it to keep that worm up. So, but I would recommend the good old offset worm hook. All right, so that's it, guys. Go bass fishing this year. Use a big worm, catch you a big bass. We'll see you in the next video. Peace.